The dying German Shepherd saw its owner crying. What it did next will make you cry. The soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead offered little warmth to the cold sterility of the veterinary clinic. It was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of machines and the gentle whisper of breath being fought for. In the back room, where lives were measured in heartbeats and IV drips, Henry sat hunched in a metal chair beside the stainless steel examination table. His hand, weathered and trembling, clutched tightly around a thick, fur-covered paw. Bruno's paw, the pads once toughened by years of trail walks, fetch games, and garden patrols, now lay limp in Henry's palm. His fur had thinned in patches, and his once noble frame had shrunken with the weight of illness. Henry didn't cry, not the loud kind, but the tears slid down his face in a silent procession of grief. His thumb moved gently across the back of Bruno's paw, as if willing warmth back into it, as if love alone could reverse the slow dimming of those deep brown eyes. 12 years. 12 years of sunrises shared on porch steps and muddy adventures through woods. Of quiet evenings by the fire, Bruno's head resting against Henry's thigh, content just to be close. He had come into Henry's life after the darkest storm, the sudden death of his wife, Marjorie. A young pup then, Bruno had padded into the echoing silence of the old farmhouse and filled it with purpose. He didn't ask questions. He didn't retreat from grief. He simply stayed. And now, as the steady beep of the heart monitor slowed, Henry did the only thing that felt right. He stayed too. Dr. Lewis, tall and sharp-featured, his white coat crisp and professional, stood at the foot of the table, arms folded tight against his chest. He'd explained everything: the kidney failure, the inflammation, the toxins building with nowhere to go. He had used the words "it's time" with a gentle, practiced tone, but Henry had barely heard him. His focus was locked on Bruno's ribs, watching them rise and fall in painful, shallow bursts. The dog let out a faint exhale, like a sigh, and his eyes fluttered half shut. "I'm not ready," Henry whispered, his voice hoarse. Dr. Lewis glanced away, politely giving him the illusion of privacy. "He's still here. I can feel it." His thumb traced the familiar fur again. "We've been through worse, haven't we, boy?" Dr. Lewis shifted his stance. "Mr. Alcott, I know how hard this is, but sometimes letting go is the kindest thing we can do." Henry didn't reply. He couldn't. His throat burned with held-back sobs. Instead, he leaned closer, his gray stubble brushing against Bruno's forehead. "Hey," he murmured, "you remember the lake? That trip where you jumped off the dock before I even unpacked the cooler?" His voice cracked. "And the time you scared off that bear? Lord, I thought we were both goners. You've always protected me." Bruno didn't stir. "Remember when I had that scare with my heart? You wouldn't leave the bed. Just lay there watching me breathe, like you were making sure I wouldn't leave you." The heart monitor beeped again, slower now. Henry bowed his head, forehead touching Bruno's. "Don't leave me, buddy. Not yet." And then, the faintest flicker, a twitch of muscle near Bruno's eye. So subtle, it might have been imagined. Henry jerked back, blinking. "Did you see that?" he said, his voice sharp, desperate. Dr. Lewis stepped forward, skepticism painted across his face. He checked the monitor, looked at the dog. "It could be a reflex. Sometimes the body twitches near the end." But Henry wasn't convinced. He leaned in again. "Bruno?" His hand found Bruno's paw once more. A warmth still lingered, or maybe it was his own. "You're still in there, aren't you?" And then it came. Unmistakable. A faint movement of Bruno's tongue, licking the dry edge of his lips, followed by a barely audible whimper. Henry's breath caught in his throat. "He moved. He licked. Did you see it?" This time even Dr. Lewis couldn't deny it. He blinked, taken aback. That's not common. At this stage, most dogs—" "He's not most dog," Henry snapped, clutching Bruno's paw tighter. "You said it yourself. He's strong. Maybe he just needs more time." Dr. Lewis opened his mouth, then closed it again, his mind racing to recalibrate everything he thought he knew. He looked at the chart in his hand, then at the dog, then back at Henry. "I'll increase the fluids. But we're still very much in critical territory. He needs rest. And I need you to understand, this could still go either way." Henry didn't answer. He reached for a nearby chair and pulled it closer to the table, never letting go of Bruno. "I'm not going anywhere." As the clinic staff slowly cleared the room, the quiet returned. Henry adjusted himself, drawing his coat tighter. The air smelled of antiseptic and something older, something like finality. But Henry pushed the thought aside. Bruno's breathing was still shallow, still uneven, but it was there. Each breath was a stubborn defiance of death. Henry began to speak again, voice low, steady, like a lullaby wrapped in memories. "Do you remember our first winter? You were just a pup, slipping on the ice, barking at snowflakes like they were invaders. I had to carry you back to the cabin, remember? You chewed through your leash the next day." A flicker of the tail. Just once, but it was enough. Enough to break something open in Henry's chest, a dam of disbelief giving way to cautious hope. His voice grew stronger. "That's right. You always hated being told no, just like Marjorie." He chuckled softly. "She used to say you were too much like me." Bruno didn't lift his head, but his breathing deepened, just barely. The monitor responded with a steadier rhythm. Night crept in slow through the narrow window, casting long shadows over the clinic walls. A nurse passed once, peeking in, her eyes wide with quiet wonder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She saw what Henry did, a fight not yet finished. Hour by hour, Henry stayed. His voice carried story after story. The trout that got away, the lightning storm that forced them into a tent for 2 days, the long hikes where neither of them knew where the trail ended and the memory began. Sometimes he cried, sometimes he laughed. Mostly he just stayed, whispering, remembering, loving. By the time the first hint of dawn pressed itself against the frost-bitten windowpane, Henry's back ached and his throat was raw. But he didn't move, not until he felt it. A shift. Bruno stirred, more than before. His head lifted slightly, trembled, and then found Henry's knee. His eyes, dull but present, blinked once, and then again. He didn't bark, didn't wag with strength, but his gaze met Henry's, tired and familiar. Henry broke. The sob came up sharp, like it had waited 12 hours to be released. He leaned forward, both hands now cradling Bruno's face. "You came back," he whispered. "You stubborn old soul. You came back to me." Behind him, Dr. Lewis stood in stunned silence. The monitor beeped steady now. Not perfect, not healed, but alive. Henry didn't look away, not even for a moment. He rested his forehead against Bruno's and closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. "You're not done yet," he murmured. "Neither of us are." And somewhere deep in that shared silence, a tail moved, just once, and the day began. Morning sunlight filtered through the wide windows of the clinic's recovery room, casting soft gold over the tile floor, where Bruno now lay wrapped in warm blankets. His body was still frail, his breathing still slightly labored, but the pale rhythm of life pulsing beneath his ribs had steadied overnight into something precious, something defiant. Henry sat beside him, perched on a chair dragged so close his knees brushed the edge of Bruno's makeshift bed. He hadn't moved much since the night before, just shifted positions to relieve the ache in his lower back, stretched his legs a little, but he hadn't slept. He didn't dare. Not while Bruno was still in that delicate space between here and gone. Every blink from the dog felt like a gift. Every flick of his ear, a silent reminder that love had held the line. Dr. Lewis returned just after 7, his usual cool composure frayed by the astonishing change he had witnessed the night before. He stood in the doorway for a moment, arms crossed over his chest as if unsure how to enter the space now charged with something more than science. When he finally stepped in, clipboard in hand, his voice was softer than usual. "He's a miracle," he said, not as a declaration, but like he was still convincing himself. Henry didn't respond immediately. He was gently stroking Bruno's head, his fingers threading through the familiar patch of fur between his ears. He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot but clear. "He's not done yet," he said simply. He still has more to give. Dr. Lewis crouched beside the table, checking the IV, listening to Bruno's heart. The dog's eyes flicked toward him, following the motion. His vitals have improved, the vet admitted, glancing at the monitor. Still not out of the woods, but definitely a turn I didn't expect. Henry gave a tired smile. He never was one for predictions. Dr. Lewis nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching. I'll keep him on fluids, monitor the kidney function. If he keeps responding, we might start a very light nutrition plan by tomorrow. He paused, then added, You staying again? Henry looked at him as if the question made no sense. Of course, and he did. The hours passed like pages in a slow, sacred book. Henry read aloud from the old adventure novel he always kept in the glove compartment of his truck, one he used to read aloud on camping trips, his voice carrying through the rustling pines as Bruno curled beside the fire. He skipped the dramatic parts, favoring the passages that described quiet rivers and windswept hills. Sometimes Bruno would stir at familiar words. Sometimes he'd sigh, the way he used to when Henry droned on too long. It was their rhythm, a language only they spoke. By mid-afternoon, Henry dozed briefly, his chin resting on his chest. It wasn't true sleep, just the kind of rest a body takes when it has no choice. He startled awake when he felt movement near his foot. Bruno, eyes half open, was attempting to sit up. Hey, easy, Henry whispered, moving quickly to steady him. Bruno's legs shook violently beneath him, and he sank back into the blanket with a soft grunt. But his eyes didn't close this time. They watched Henry, tired but aware. That gaze, so familiar it ached. Henry smiled and cupped the dog's face gently. That's the spirit. You just rest. We'll take it slow. The rest of the day blurred into a rhythm of small things. A nurse refilling the water bowl, a new blanket draped over Bruno's legs, soft conversations between Henry and staff. Word of the dog who had come back from the edge traveled quickly. Technicians stopped by just to peek in, their faces lit with quiet awe. Even hardened professionals were humbled by the quiet force that filled the room. It wasn't just about medicine anymore. It was about something harder to measure, something deeper. As evening approached, Henry got up for the first time in hours to stretch his legs. The clinic was quiet now, the usual buzz of appointments winding down. He stepped outside into the fading light, letting the cold air fill his lungs. Snow had started to fall in delicate flakes, dusting the sidewalk. He looked up at the darkening sky, breath-forming clouds in front of him. For a moment he let his shoulders sag, exhaustion catching up to him all at once. But when he turned back to the window, he saw Bruno still watching the door, as if waiting for him to return. That gaze steadied something inside him. He walked back inside just as Dr. Lewis was emerging from the back. The vet held a small plastic container in his hands. I have some nutrient paste, he said. Not much, but if he can tolerate even a little, it's a good sign. Henry nodded. Let's try. They moved together into the recovery room. Bruno lifted his head weakly at the sound of Henry's voice. The paste was offered on a gloved fingertip, and to everyone's quiet amazement, Bruno's tongue reached out, slow and shaky, to take it. Just a taste, but enough. That night, Henry stayed again. The chair was unforgiving, the room still too bright to rest well, but he didn't care. He wrapped his coat around himself and settled beside the table. Bruno dozed fitfully, his body still fragile. Henry leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you remember when we got caught in that thunderstorm up in Little Pine Valley? He chuckled quietly. You were just a year old. I thought we'd both be struck by lightning the way you kept barking at the sky. Bruno's tail moved, just a flick, and Henry's heart rose like a tide. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the town in silence. But inside the room, the hush was different. It was sacred, weighted with memory and waiting. Henry drifted between moments, present and past interwoven like threads. He remembered the first time he saw Bruno, a gangly pup with two large paws and eyes too wise for his age. He had been a mess those first months after Marjorie, the house too quiet, the nights unbearable. Bruno had filled those spaces with unspoken understanding, with presence. He didn't need to fix anything. He just stayed. And now it was Henry's turn to do the same. The early hours of morning brought another surprise. Bruno, still lying down, shifted his weight and let out a deep, low breath, almost a groan. His nose twitched, and slowly, very slowly, he tried to move his front paws beneath him. Henry was at his side in an instant, murmuring encouragement. "Easy, buddy. Take it slow." The dog lifted his head a few inches off the blanket, held it there, and let it fall back gently. His eyes blinked, less foggy now. When Henry leaned close, Bruno's tongue brushed against his knuckles. Not just a reflex this time. A kiss. Henry's throat tightened. "You're fighting," he whispered. "You're really fighting." And deep in his chest, something cracked open. Hope, yes, but more than that. It was as if something long buried had stirred again. A fire he hadn't felt since Marjorie died. A sense that maybe, just maybe, not all endings came when expected. That some loves, if held tightly enough, could carve a path back through even the deepest dark. Henry laid his head beside Bruno's, his hand resting gently on the rise and fall of the dog's ribs. "We've still got time," he murmured. "You and me, boy. We're not done yet." And in that quiet room, where life had teetered on the edge for so long, a bond older than grief, stronger than loss, burned quietly on, steady, warm, and very much alive. The storm had passed, but Henry's heart still beat with the cautious rhythm of someone who had lived too close to loss. 2 days had slipped by since Bruno's stirring return from the brink. The clinic's recovery room, once sterile and cold, had become a haven of quiet devotion. Bruno was stronger now, not well, not yet, but no longer tethered so tightly to the thread between life and death. His eyes followed Henry more often, and when Henry spoke, those ears, silvered with age and illness, would perk faintly, like he still hung on to every word. It was early morning, and the sky beyond the windows blushed with soft pastels, pale blue melting into the sleepy lavender of dawn. The world outside was waking slowly, reluctantly. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic, old coffee, and the musky comfort of dog fur. Henry sat cross-legged on the floor now, no longer confined to the metal chair. A pillow tucked behind his back, and Bruno's head resting in his lap, he rubbed gentle circles along the old shepherd's spine. Bruno sighed, long and low, as though even now he was releasing the remnants of pain still lodged in his bones. Henry hadn't left the clinic in 72 hours, not really. He'd washed up in the staff bathroom, accepted a fresh shirt from a sympathetic nurse, eaten a handful of dry granola bars that someone had left in a basket on the counter. Sleep came only in slivers, moments stolen between heart monitor beeps and the quiet shuffle of vet techs checking vitals. But he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was Bruno. A nurse poked her head in, clipboard in hand. "He's ready for another round of hydration. Might perk him up a bit more." Henry nodded, smoothing Bruno's fur. "He's been lifting his head on his own now," he said, pride warming his voice. "And he barked this morning. Just once. Soft, but it was there." The nurse smiled. "We heard it. It made the whole front desk stop what they were doing." Henry chuckled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd cry over a bark." "You'd be surprised how often we do," she replied softly before stepping in to change the IV bag. Henry watched her hands move with practiced gentleness, and Bruno barely flinched. He was used to the pokes now. It broke Henry's heart to think of how many times he'd endured things like this without complaint. How much pain he must have tucked away in silence, just to stay close. "You always were tougher than me," Henry murmured once they were alone again. "Even now." Bruno shifted, and Henry felt the subtle press of his nose against his wrist. Not a plea, not a whimper, just touch, connection, proof. The days melted into each other, and with every hour Bruno inched further from the shadow that had tried to claim him. On the fourth morning he stood, shaky, slow, but upright. The room seemed to hold its breath. Henry stood with him, hands ready to catch him if he fell, eyes wide with disbelief. "You stubborn, beautiful old boy," he whispered, tears blurring his vision. "Look at you." Bruno wobbled forward, one step, two, toward his water bowl. He drank slowly, then turned and walked, unsteady but determined, back to Henry's side. His tail moved, just a sway, but it was enough to send Henry sinking to the floor in awe. "I thought I lost you," he whispered into the scruff of Bruno's neck. I thought, but he didn't finish the thought, because here they were, breathing, standing, together. That evening, Dr. Lewis sat down with Henry in the corner of the room, a notepad balanced on his knee. "We've done about as much as we can here," he said, watching Henry carefully. "Bruno's stable. His kidneys aren't perfect, but they're functioning better than expected. Whatever happened in there, his will to live, your presence, or both, it pulled him back. He's still vulnerable. He'll need medication, a special diet, regular checkups." "I'll do it all," Henry said immediately. "Every bit of it. You'll need to watch for signs of relapse, fatigue, vomiting, appetite loss." "I'll learn," Henry said. His voice was soft, but it carried steel. "We're not giving up now." Dr. Lewis gave a small nod. "I believe you. Most people wouldn't have stayed. Not like that. Not for so long." Henry looked at him, brow furrowed. "He stayed with me," he said simply. "All these years. Through everything. How could I do less?" They discharged Bruno the next morning. The clinic staff gathered near the front doors as Henry gently coaxed the old shepherd into the truck's back seat, padded with old blankets and pillows. A vet tech handed him a tote bag packed with meds, syringes, supplements, and paperwork. Another handed over a small frame photo, a snapshot someone had taken of Henry asleep beside Bruno's table on the second night. "We thought you should have this," she said, her voice choked. Henry stared at it, throat thick. "Thank you," he managed. As he climbed into the driver's seat, Bruno let out a soft huff behind him. Henry reached back, letting his fingers find Bruno's shoulder. Just a touch. Reassurance both ways. The drive home was slow, careful. Snow flurried in delicate spirals across the road. The farmhouse stood just as they had left it, the porch light still on, the shadows inside waiting. Henry parked by the steps and took a moment before opening the door. "Ready?" he asked over his shoulder. Bruno's ears twitched. It was enough. Inside, everything had changed. The house, once quiet and still, now hummed with anticipation. Henry moved slowly, guiding Bruno in through the back entrance, where fewer steps waited. He had already cleared a space in the living room, laying down soft rugs and an old mattress near the fireplace. Bruno sank into it with a groan that was half exhaustion, half contentment. The fire crackled gently, casting orange-gold light across the walls. Henry knelt beside him, brushing snow from his fur. "We're home, buddy," he whispered. "We made it." That night, Henry didn't go upstairs. He pulled an extra blanket onto the floor beside Bruno's bed and lay there, listening to the soft rise and fall of his friend's breath. He drifted in and out of sleep, dreams filled with old trails, lakeside reflections, and Marjorie's laughter drifting through tall trees. In the deepest part of the night, he woke to find Bruno nestled closer, his nose against Henry's chest, tail flicking once. Henry smiled through the blur of tears and wrapped an arm around his friend. "You're still saving me," he whispered, "after all this time." The fire glowed quietly beside them. Outside, the snow fell soft and silent, erasing footprints and sorrow in equal measure. But inside, two souls lay side by side, one who had pulled a man from the edge of grief and one who had been pulled back from the edge of death. Not ready to say goodbye, not just yet, not for a long, long while. In the weeks that followed, time took on a different shape. Days stretched out like golden thread, slow and quiet, each hour a lesson in gratitude, each sunrise a fragile miracle. The old farmhouse, once a space of soft decay and quiet resignation, now pulsed gently with life again. Not loud or chaotic, but in a way that could only be felt in small things. The rhythmic click of Bruno's nails on the wooden floor as he padded carefully to the fireplace. The scrape of Henry's chair pulling out in the morning as he read the paper aloud. Mostly out of habit, mostly for Bruno's sake. The kettle's whistle and the echo of Bruno's faint sigh as he settled into his corner of the rug. There was a sacred rhythm to it all, like a song Henry had forgotten how to sing until his old friend had stirred once more, beneath the weight of grief and medicine and memory. Every movement Bruno made now was measured, slow, deliberate. The bounding energy of youth had long faded, and even the mischievous spark he carried into his middle years had dulled with age. But there was a depth in his gaze, a knowing, that held Henry captive. He had always believed dogs understood more than they were given credit for. But now, after what they had endured together, after that night in the clinic when the world had hovered in the balance, Henry saw it clearer than ever. Bruno knew. He knew the edges they'd walked, the price of return, and still he had chosen to stay. Mornings began with Henry rising stiffly from the mattress beside the hearth, joints aching from sleeping on the floor. Bruno would be already watching him, eyes half-lidded, tail tapping faintly against the rug in lazy acknowledgement. Henry would bend, press his forehead to the old dog's brow, whispering, "Good morning, my friend," before beginning the day. Medications were administered with practiced patience. Pills tucked into soft bread, syringes measured with steady hands. Bruno tolerated it all with a quiet nobility, as if he understood this was the cost of more time. Outside, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of damp earth beneath. Spring was coming. You could hear it in the chirp of birds returning to the trees, in the way the wind carried just a whisper of warmth beneath its chill. Henry began taking Bruno out for short walks again. Not far, just to the edge of the property, where the old oak tree stood like a sentinel watching over the field. Bruno's steps were slow, his breathing heavy, but he never turned back. He walked beside Henry as he always had, shoulder to thigh, stride to stride. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. It was in the silence that their bond spoke loudest. One afternoon, Henry stood at the edge of the property line, watching a pair of deer pick their way across the clearing. Bruno stood beside him, head low, ears perked just slightly forward. Henry squinted into the pale light. "You remember the time we scared a whole herd of them up by Pine Hollow?" he asked. Bruno let out a soft huff, as if amused by the memory. "I was so sure they'd trample us. You just stood there, puffed up like some kind of hero." Henry chuckled, the sound catching slightly in his throat. "You always made me braver than I was." The words hung in the air for a moment before Henry cleared his throat and started back toward the house. Bruno followed, steady but slower. Henry kept pace with him, his steps deliberate. At night, the quiet was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt full, of breathing, of warmth, of the memory of nights once spent in loneliness, now rewritten. Henry would lie on the mattress beside Bruno, staring at the ceiling while his fingers traced absent-minded patterns along the old shepherd's spine. Sometimes he would speak. Not much, just pieces of thought he hadn't said out loud in years. About Marjorie mostly. About how the silence after she passed had felt like drowning in still water. About the days he forgot to eat, the nights he forgot how to sleep. About how Bruno, still young then, would sit beside him with his head resting on Henry's knee for hours without moving. "You saved me, you know," he whispered once, his voice barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "Back then, I never told you how close I was to just letting it all go." Bruno had shifted slightly, his breath warm against Henry's hand. "You gave me something to care for, a reason to keep getting up. You didn't ask anything of me. You just stayed." The fire popped softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "And then," Henry continued, "you got old. Just like me. And I started preparing. Told myself I'd be ready, that I'd say goodbye when the time came. But I wasn't ready. I'm still not." His throat tightened, and he exhaled slowly, the sound tremulous. "But you stayed again. Somehow. And I just keep wondering if I deserve it." Bruno lifted his head then, just slightly, and rested it against Henry's chest. The weight of it, warm and familiar, undid him. He let the tears fall freely, no longer ashamed of how deeply this creature had rooted himself in his heart. "You stubborn old mutt," he whispered, his voice thick with love. "You always knew more than you let on." The days passed, and Bruno continued to hold on, inching forward, little by little. Some days he ate well. Others he barely touched his food. Some mornings he made it to the oak tree. Others he simply curled by the fire and slept the day away. But he was still here, and that was enough. Henry kept the routine sacred. Meals on time, walks when possible, nights spent beside the fire. He learned the new language of Bruno's aging body, the pause before he stood, the way he shifted when his hips hurt, the long blink that meant not now, later. One evening, Henry pulled out an old photo album from the hallway shelf, dusted and forgotten. He brought it to the fire, placed it between them, and opened it. Pictures spilled across the pages. Bruno as a pup, ears too big for his head, chewing on a boot twice his size. Bruno in the lake, soaked and proud. Bruno next to Marjorie, her hand resting on his head as if he were the most precious thing she'd ever held. Henry smiled at the image, pressing his palm against it. She loved you too, you know. Probably more than she loved me on some days. Bruno let out a soft breath, as if he could see it all too. She always said dogs choose their people, that it's not the other way around. I think you chose me when I needed it most, and somehow I think you knew I'd need you again. He looked at Bruno, at the graying muzzle resting quietly on the rug. Maybe I never saved you at all. Maybe it was always you saving me. And in the hush that followed, as the firelight danced and the stars began to press themselves against the window panes, Henry reached out, laid a hand over Bruno's heart and whispered, "Whatever time we've got left, we live it together. Deal?" Bruno's tail tapped softly against the floor, a whisper of agreement. Outside, the world kept moving, seasons shifting, time slipping past, but inside that old farmhouse, two hearts beat in quiet synchrony, each carrying the other through what remained. Neither rushed, neither afraid, just present, just enough. The wind had changed. It came now not as a biting thing, not cruel or sharp like in the long winter months, but as a gentler breath that stirred the tall grass beyond the porch and brought with it the soft scent of damp earth and newly blooming wildflowers. The trees rustled like whispers overhead, and sunlight danced between their limbs in quiet patterns across the living room floor. Bruno lay there, where he always did now, stretched on his rug beside the hearth, his frame thinner than it had been weeks ago, but his eyes, those soulful, deep brown eyes, still carried light. Henry sat near, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, an old book cradled in one hand, the other resting over Bruno's chest, feeling the rhythm of a heart that beat more slowly now, but no less surely. Each breath was drawn with effort, but it came, steady as a promise. The fire had long been extinguished. Spring's warmth no longer called for its glow, but Henry still kept the space prepared, still lay his mattress close to the rug each night, still found sleep best when his hand was curled in Bruno's fur. It had become their unspoken ritual, a sacred end to each day. Henry brushing down Bruno's coat, whispering stories into the quiet, and Bruno, ever listening, breathing softly as though he was taking it all in and tucking the memories away someplace safe. The vet visits had slowed. Dr. Lewis still called every few days to check in, and Henry always gave the same report. Stable, slow, holding on. Bruno's appetite had dulled, and his walks had become shorter, just to the porch and back most days. But there was no pain. Not yet. Only weariness, like a candle near its end. Not snuffed out, but softly fading. Henry had begun to notice other things too. Small things that told him the season was shifting not just outside, but within. Bruno's head now rested longer before it lifted. He no longer chased dreams in his sleep, no more twitching paws or muffled barks that had once filled the nights. Instead, he slept deeply, his breathing shallow but calm, as if even in dreams he was holding his energy close. And Henry, he felt it, that slow preparation of goodbye. It crept in during the quiet moments when the wind sighed through the windows, when the birds called in the early morning and Bruno didn't stir. But he didn't speak it aloud, not yet. Instead, he gave Bruno more of everything, more stories, more touches, more of himself. Because what else could he offer to the creature who had carried him through every darkness, who had given him back his own heart again and again? One evening, as golden light spilled into the house like honey and turned the edges of everything soft, Henry pulled out Marjorie's old quilt from the cedar chest. He laid it gently over the rug beside Bruno, smoothing its worn corners and tucking it around the old dog's back legs. Bruno's eyes opened, slow, watchful. "It's hers," Henry said softly. "She always said it had magic, kept the cold away. Maybe it'll help you rest easier tonight." He settled beside him, his knees creaking as he knelt, then sat back against the leg of the couch. For a long time, he just watched Bruno breathe. In, out, in, out. Each rise and fall a quiet gift. I've been thinking, Henry said, voice low, about what comes next. Bruno's tail gave a slow tap, as if to say, go on. I think I'm going to open up the cabin again, the one by the lake. You remember it. You used to chase squirrels like they owed you rent. He smiled at the memory, his eyes brightening. Marjorie never liked going after August, said it was too quiet. But I think maybe I could go there again. Maybe I'll plant that garden she always talked about. Bruno blinked once, then rested his head on his paws. I'd like to scatter her ashes up there. Let her be part of the wild things she loved. He reached forward, running a hand gently along Bruno's spine. And when the time comes, I'll bring you too, the both of you, together again. The words caught in his throat, but he let them come. He had said so much already, there was nothing left to hide. Not today, he said quickly, his voice soft. Not yet, but when you're ready, I'll carry you one more time. Just like before, I'll take care of you. That night, sleep came slower than usual. Henry lay beside Bruno, the quilt pulled over them both. The stars blinked gently outside the windows, and the wind sang through the grass. In the stillness, Henry could feel something shifting, not in a loud, breaking kind of way, but gently, like the closing of a book you didn't want to end. Sometime in the early hours, Henry woke to silence. Not the silence of emptiness or fear, but something peaceful, complete. Bruno still lay beside him, his body warm beneath the quilt, but Henry could feel it. He knew before his hand even moved to Bruno's chest. The rhythm he had followed for so long had finally stilled. No flutter, no breath, just stillness. Henry didn't cry at first. He simply sat up, one hand resting gently on the dog's head, brushing behind his ears the way he had since he was a pup. The fire had long gone cold, but sunlight had begun to edge into the room, casting golden light over them both. You waited, he whispered. You waited until I could let go. His voice broke then, not with pain, but with love so full it couldn't be held. The tears came quiet, soft, as he cradled Bruno's face in his hands. Thank you, he said through them. Thank you for every step, every year, every breath he sat there for a long while, the house silent but full, the kind of full that comes from lives well shared. When he finally rose, Henry moved with care. He wrapped Bruno in the quilt, held him as he had when he was young, when storms frightened him and nothing but Henry's arms could settle his heart. He carried him out to the truck, the fields still glistening with morning dew, the air warm and alive with the sound of spring. The road to the cabin was long, winding through hills and trees just beginning to bloom. Birds called from branches overhead, and the sun painted the world in colors that felt like remembrance. When he arrived, the cabin stood quiet but waiting. Henry stepped inside and laid Bruno down beside the hearth, where the morning light struck the wooden floor like stained glass. He opened the windows. Let the breeze in. Let the lake's breath find them. Later, when the ashes were scattered, Marjorie's and weeks after, Bruno's too, Henry stood barefoot in the garden he had planted. Wildflowers grew in crooked, beautiful lines. Wind chimes sang softly from the porch. The lake shimmered below, and above it all, the sky stretched wide and forgiving. He spoke to them often, both of them, in the morning as the kettle boiled, in the evening as the stars arrived one by one. He told them stories. He read aloud. He laughed. He cried. But mostly he lived. In the house they had made a home, among memories that did not ache but warmed. And some nights, when the wind was just right, Henry would swear he heard it. That low, familiar sigh, the weight of a head pressed gently against his knee, the echo of a presence that had once rescued him and never truly left. Because some goodbyes aren't endings at all. They're promises, and love like that, loyal, quiet, deep, it doesn't disappear. It stays.